This is Nick Black, and today I'm at the Dreamworks Animation Studio in Glendale, Los Angeles, and I'm talking to Simon Wells. Firstly, Simon, thanks for taking time to talk to us.
Hi, nice to see you.
The first question I want to ask you, Simon, is show business is a very erratic vocation to pursue, and I believe your father was in show business as well.
No, actually not my father. My father's father, my grandfather. Yeah, he was in the British film business back between the wars and just after the wars. He actually ended up being president of the Children's Film Foundation for a while, I think in the 70s.
And what was his name, Simon?
Frank Wells, but not the Frank Wells who was the chairman of Walt Disney Animation in recent years. My parents both taught in the University of Cambridge. My mother was the senior tutor of Newnham College until she retired, and my father was deputy head of the zoology department.
So what basically got you into animation?
Well, that's a good question. I always drew pictures. From the age of 4, I was drawing all the time. I mean, I used to get in the way of my schoolwork. I just wanted to draw all the time. I went to art school actually with the intention of becoming an illustrator. And while I was at art school, I met a guy called John Grace, who was one of my tutors, and he looked at my work and said, you should try animation. So I thought, well, okay. He also had a policy of trying to get people work during the summers to actually get real industry experience. And so he thought, well, okay, who's the biggest name in animation in England that we can try and get you in contact with? And so he wrote to Richard Williams, who at the time he'd won an Oscar for his half-hour short film of Dickens' Christmas Carol. And also, he was a huge award-winning commercials director. Dick wrote back and said, no, go away, we don't take students. And John said, no, you really should see his portfolio. So I sent a portfolio to Dick, and Dick basically on the spot said, do you want a job when you leave college? I was very lucky. From the end of my second year at college, I had a job lined up, so my third year at college was easy.
Did you work in the commercials?
Yeah, entirely, for a couple of years. Actually, I started directing commercials very early on because Dick got a couple of very sort of cheap and easy little jobs in and thought, give this guy a go. And so I'd do client meetings and do the animatic of the show, and then actually go through and do all the animation.
Animated commercials, not live action?
No, these are just 30-second animated commercials. Did a few of those Chocolate and Frankenberry, do you know those? Breakfast cereals with marshmallows in them. I mean, it's horrible stuff, but... so I did that for a couple of years, and then Dick was headhunted because Bob Zemeckis got interested in doing the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and from the book, he was looking for a way of doing it that was beyond the stuff that Disney were talking about doing, where they were saying, you should lock down the camera, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other. And Chuck Jones, the famous animator Chuck Jones, who knows Dick very well, said, the man you need is Dick Williams. So Bob and Steven Spielberg got in touch with Dick Williams and got him to direct the animation on that film. And because I was part of the commercials outfit, Dick brought me with him to work on the film.
Was this still in England, Simon?
Yeah, this was a studio based in Camden, North London.
Was it very different to doing your commercials, Roger Rabbit, or was it basically the same process?
Well, the process of traditional animation is the same. You just do hundreds and hundreds of drawings, very labor intensive. But because of the live action interaction meant that you were doing a lot of stuff where every single frame of the film was printed out onto sheets of paper, and you then lay another sheet of paper on top and draw your rabbit on frame by frame all the way through the film. So in some ways it was technically different from the commercials.
Did you do any commercials that were live action and animation?
I never did, but some were done. I mean, actually that's one of the reasons why Bob chose Dick Williams, because there was a Fanta commercial that he'd done using the Disney characters where he'd moved the camera around, and Bob said, that's what I want to do in Roger Rabbit.
Now, after Roger Rabbit, did you stay with Dick Williams, or what happened then, Simon?
No, Dick, basically, he had sort of hiatus and closed down the studio for a while, and I actually did a couple of commercials for a few other animation houses in London, and at the time, Bob was gearing up to do Back to the Future 2 and 3, and so he invited me to come out and do storyboard work for those couple of movies.
You did them here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I came out and worked here for 3 months. I did some work while I was back in London as well, but came out here for 3 months. And while I was out here, unbeknownst to me, there were discussions going on about doing American Tail 2, a fully animated traditional animation movie. And so one day I was actually on my way to a meeting with Zemeckis, walking through the parking lot of Amblin. Stephen got out of his car and said, oh, Simon, you got a moment? Okay. And he said, we're thinking of doing American Tail 2. And I said, well, I'm kind of thinking of getting out of animation. I'm rather enjoying this live action storyboarding I'm doing. He said, well, do you want to direct? It's like, well, Steven Spielberg asked you if you want to direct a show. You don't exactly say no, do you?
Of course not. How did that go, Simon?
Well, the idea of that was really to form an animation studio in London to use this vast pool of talent that they knew was there because of Roger Rabbit, because very few people came from Disney to work on Roger Rabbit. These were all people who were either what we call call the animation gypsies, who travel around the world working in different parts of the world, or people who were resident in England doing a lot of the commercial stuff, which was then exported to other parts of the world. So we set up a studio called Amblimation, from Amblin. We made American Tail 2, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and a film which I direct on my own called Balto.
Tell us a bit about Balto.
It's based on the true events of 1925 when there's a diphtheria outbreak in Nome, Alaska. Balto is actually, he's the hero dog who brought the antitoxin through. At the time, there was no rail line through to Nome, so the only way of getting stuff through to them was actually by dog sled. This was the middle of winter. There's actually a statue of Balto in Central Park in New York, and for the front ends of the movie, we shot live action at that statue. People thought we created it especially for the movie, but it's actually there near the Children's Zoo in the, the southeastern corner of Central Park.
How did you find out about this story, Balto?
It was a story outline, a story outline that was sent to Amblin as a proposition for an animated movie, and we read it and said this would be great, this would be a really good story.
During American Tail 2, was that the time that you had to move over here permanently?
No, that was the end of Balto. Basically, as we were coming to the end of Balto, Steven announced that he and Jeffrey and David were setting up Dreamworks, and at the time we had been planning on closing the studio in London and moving out to LA to be nearer to Steven anyway. So this kind of fell in with what we were planning. So yeah, the last 6 months of doing Balto, I was commuting from England. We were still doing Balto in England, and I was coming out here to help start up Prince of Egypt and actually build this whole new studio.
It's a huge complex. Can you tell us a little bit about this complex, Simon, the new Dreamworks Animation Studio?
This campus was actually built during the making of Prince of Egypt. We actually made Prince of Egypt in a building on the Universal lot. But this place, let's see, it comprises 4 major buildings and a parking structure. Each of the buildings is like 3 or 4 stories high. It's all wired throughout for computer. All of the offices are sort of ergonomically designed around the needs of the artists. There's a whole building which is animation, that's animation and background. The building we're in at the moment is story, layout is the floor above us, and visual development the floor below us. Then the Nile building over there, which arches over that little river, that has technology and the special effects department. And then there's a big building at the back there. I'd tell a lie, there's actually an extra building, which is the TV animation building. And then there's also a building that has the commissary. We serve lunch for all of the staff free of charge every day.
So obviously DreamWorks is heavily committed to animation. That's part of their philosophy.
Animation is one of those things where it's like having a really good football team or something like that. You have to work over many, many years to build this staff up, get them working as a team, get them working as a unit. You know, it's very difficult to just start up a studio and make a film and have it be any good at all. Prince of Egypt actually was technically very good, partly because 120 people on the staff had already been working together for 8 years.
Is DreamWorks trying to follow the old Disney blueprint like that?
Oh yeah, very much so. When Disney originally set up his feature animation studio, he had people come in and study the ergonomics of what the artists did. He built furniture and built the studio around what they needed. The old Disney lot is a wonderful place. Every room has a window out onto a little bit of garden. Of course, the animators were moved out of that pretty quickly in recent years, and they've actually got quite a nice building now that's just off the freeway.
Now, Jeffrey Katzenberg was very well known for his animation films at Disney, so is he sort of like the man in charge here, and David Geffen and Steven Spielberg sort of like take a background view, or how does that work, Simon?
Yeah, they sort of divide up the aspects of DreamWorks because, you know, DreamWorks does not just animation but feature films, games, television, and there's a whole music division. Of course, David very much oversees the music division and Stephen oversees the live action and games. And animation is really the field that Jeffrey knows the best. I mean, he's involved in the other stuff as well. Yeah, he's very much the visionary head of animation.
I just quickly want to get back to Balto, released in winter of 95.
Yeah. We'd already been working on Prince of Egypt for a year by then.
That was Amblin?
Yeah. It's out on video. It's one of those films that didn't really get a lot of publicity when it came out, and so a lot of people have seen it on video and said, this is great, I wish I'd seen it in the cinema, but they didn't even know it had been released.
Why was that? The marketing wasn't targeted correctly, or any ideas?
I have no idea. The way in which marketing departments operate is always a bit strange. They have a certain budget for the year and they have to choose the things that they decide to put their push behind.
Because you also did the dinosaur story, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and I don't think that was as successful as probably it should have been.
Well, I only worked on that for a while. I was part of developing it and then I helped out as a sort of caretaker director for about a year. There were many things about that production that were messy, including the fact that there were 4 different directors who worked on the show. Yeah, I don't know, that one probably wasn't such a bad idea, but it wasn't marketed heavily because they might have been just throwing money away.
I want to get on to Prince of Egypt now. Now that basically took 4 years from inception. Can you tell us a bit about the origin? Firstly, where did the story come from? Who finds the stories, basically?
Oh, yeah. Well, this one's interesting. When Stephen and Jeffrey and David were, they're sitting around talking about, what if we started a studio, a whole studio, not just a production company, but a whole studio. And then they talked about how they divide work up, and Jeffrey talked about doing animation. And Stephen said, well, okay, what do you need to make an animated film? What sort of stories do you look for? Because, he's been involved in feature animation, but films that we've made haven't been enormously successful, whereas Jeffrey's films have been extraordinarily successful. So Jeffrey went through and kind of listed the things that he felt were necessary. And this came to this list of things like 10 things that you need. And Stephen said, like the 10 Commandments. And Jeffrey said, yeah, like the 10 Commandments of animation. And Stephen said, no, like the 10 Commandments, the film has all those elements in it. And everyone sort of stopped for a moment and went, wow, that's an amazing idea. That is so different from anything that Disney would ever handle, or indeed anything that any other animation studio's ever tried to do. It's saying this is not going to be a fairy tale, it's not going to be a little cuddly creatures, it's not going to be a wacky movie. This is going to be big time, serious, heavy-duty, epic feature film.
With Prince of Egypt, you're credited with 2 other directors. Can you tell us, was the work segmented, or did you work as a team? Can you tell us a bit about the process?
When Steve and Brenda and I sort of got together, I'd actually worked with Steve for many years before. He'd been our producer in London, so we had a history that went back actually to Roger Rabbit. He worked on that show as well. But the 3 of us talked about how we would divide up the show, and realized that we'd had many experiences where either we'd worked for directors or been directors ourselves, where the film was split up, you take this sequence, I'll take that sequence, and you end up with a very segmented film. And we wanted to have a single voice tell this story, have a single style of cinema that ran right the way through the picture, as you do with a live-action movie. So, much to our producer's disquiet, we said, we're not going to break the movie up. We refuse to do that. We're going to work very close, hand in glove. So, through the story process, which is this sort of storyboarding and writing of the movie, we stuck very closely together. Also through directing the actors, and by that I mean not just the voice actors, but also the visual actors, the animators. We stuck very closely together. But there are a number of parts of the, if you like, the production line process in animation that we could divide up because we had been so close together in the conceptual stages, that we knew what this shot is here because of this is the point of it, don't lose the story point. And we all knew what the story point was. So I dealt with layout, which is kind of a shot design, and planning what elements are going to be in the show. Steve dealt with cleanup of animation, which is where every character looks like it's drawn by one hand throughout the movie. And Brenda dealt with the effects department and the background painting department. Then we came back together again for doing things like the sort of final composition, the final compositing of the image, and all of the sort of post-production stages like music and mixing. The result of that was that we effectively moved with one mind. We had one clear idea of the concept of the movie. And even on the things that we'd split up, we would bring the other people in if we had some important issue, some important decision to deal with. So, for instance, on the effects of the Red Sea, we always came together for that. Brenda didn't deal with that on her own.
How do you go about casting? Like, for instance, how did you go about casting Prince of Egypt? There are a lot of well-known actors. Do you cast first and then do you draw around them? Or tell us a bit about the process.
Good question. What we do, actually, is we have a pretty good idea of what the story is going to be. We haven't written all the details and so on, but we have a fairly tight idea of what the character is in the movie, how they react to things, what their nature, what their personality is. We'll also, at the same time, have been doing character design drawings, some of which you saw in the tour downstairs. These can be very rough. They can be just sort of the spirit, the feel, what this character is going to feel like. It's not necessarily the final lockdown. And at that point, we then bring in a casting director, in this case a woman called Leslie Feldman, who takes our sort of brief, our notions of what the character is, and goes out and picks a whole lot of pieces of audio tape. This can be from movies, from radio, whatever, and brings them back and says, okay, what about this voice? Now, we don't necessarily know who those voices are. We're listening to the quality of the voice and the quality of the acting, and to feel whether this character feels like it's the character that we can see. We'll also look at the character design and say, well, does that voice feel like it would come from that character? Then we'll pick a voice and say, that one's the one we think is right. And at that point, we do a little bit of test animation, where one of the animators will actually take the character design and do a piece of lip sync animation to that voice to make sure that the two things meld together. And at that point, we actually go along to the actor and say, are you interested in doing the movie? And by the way, this is what you'd look like, and this is how you'd move, and so on, which is kind of fun. But actually, sometimes we don't even know who who the voices we're listening to. It's a dead giveaway with someone like Jeff Goldblum, you know who that is, or Sandy Bullock. But actually Val Kilmer, when we heard his voice and decided he was the right voice, we didn't know it was Val.
Is there an advantage to using well-known actors? For instance, you just mentioned Jeff Goldblum. He's so recognisable. Could that have taken away from the animated character because everyone knows Jeff Goldblum's voice?
Well, there's kind of two answers to that. One is the simple answer about there is a reason why these guys are movie stars. They're movie stars because they're incredibly good actors. And when we're searching for good actors to play the roles, hey, if we're allowed to pick the very best in the world, we will, you know. That was basically the brief from Stephen and Jeffrey, was pick anyone you want and we'll see if we can get them. But in the case of Jeff Goldblum, as an example, when we went to him, we had an idea of what the character of Aaron was going to do in the story as we were telling it, but we really didn't have a personality for him at all. And Jeff brought that. He created that personality, and a lot of the humour that is in that character came naturally from Jeff. It sort of surprised us when we started recording it, and then we found, no, this is perfect. This really gives us something to get hold of. We really get to know this guy.
Just moving on with live action movies, I was just talking to a director who was very nervous that particular day because he was just about to have a test screening. Do animation movies have test screenings as well?
Yes, actually, you look at the movie a lot of times while you're making it, you know, even at very early stages, because we build what we call a Leica reel, like the camera, Leica. It's an animatic. It's rough storyboard drawings, sometimes with rough sound and music, that just goes click, 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 click through. But you can watch the whole form of the movie, and you can re-edit it and put stuff in and take stuff out before you actually make the animation. Because the moment you actually sit animators down at a desk, the costs soar. So you try and pre-edit the movie. Now that means you've watched the movie with other groups of people from the studio many, many times over. Now actually Prince of Egypt was never test screened in front of, as it were, a regular audience of people off the street. It was test screened extensively for religious interests, mostly in the interest of getting help, information, guidance from them, rather than making sure that we weren't offending them. But yeah, it was never... Typically, actually, animated movies are test screened, though. They were done extensively at Disney, for instance. I'll tell you the trouble that's coming out now with test screening is the internet, because any movie that gets test screened now gets reviewed instantly and posted on the net. I mean, there's this guy, I don't know, do you know Harry Knowles? He's become an industry figure. He operates out of Austin, Texas, and he writes this thing called Ain't It Cool News. And basically, he's a site where anybody can be a spy and write in and publish an article on his website. The danger, of course, is that it means that reviews come out on movies that may still be re-edited and changed before they're actually on general release. So I don't know what's going to happen with test screening in the future.
They might have to just keep it very, very secret, have little secrecy agreements for the audience or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, well, it depends on the filmmaker also, because I know Steven Spielberg never test screens his movies.
And look how successful he is with his film.
He's doing all right, yeah, sure.
I just noticed that Prince of Egypt has almost grossed $200 million around the world, Simon, so that's a hard act to follow. So what are you currently working on at the moment?
I was interested in sort of making the move into sort of live action and animation, or live action and heavy effects movies, just because those are the kind of movies I, always been interested in seeing in the cinema myself.
Independence Day.
Independence Day, exactly. So actually I expressed this to Jeffrey and Stephen, and they've actually offered me, well, Stephen's offered me Casper 2, which, I'm currently developing with the writers and trying to get to the point where it actually gets greenlit for production. But it's looking pretty hopeful. Knocking on wood, because these things, until you actually get the green light, nothing's ever sure.
All right, Simon, I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk to us, and all the best with Casper or any other future projects.
Thank you very much.